So let's figure out what it is doing. I'm going to change this. I'm going to hit A, select all, hit delete, and D for deselect. I'm going to change to a tool or some settings that you might use if you were working with notes, for example. Right? So we'll take this X to 128, Y to 64. Let's zoom in a bit. And this time, let's enable the default grid. So you can select it from the menu, you can hit the G key, and this is going to draw a default grid. We've got 4 bars, and if you look at the very bottom down here, as I move up this canvas, you'll see actually the note values. And these are the note values due to the mapping. Right? I've set it to major scale, but we can go to semitones and say draw the default grid. The grid will be re-rendered, right, because this is now a semitone grid. If we go to micro 16 and we say draw the default grid, it's going to change it entirely, right? So this is something else to explore. But if you're doing, I guess, conventional Western scales and note-based music, you might use semitone or major. Let's do major scale. And then I hit the G key to render the grid. This gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 octaves. Okay, so let's control click, brush tool, and if I draw a 3x3 blob of notes is going to be dissonant. Okay, I hit Z for undo. I'm going to go draw in sort of here, middle C, or actually the tool grid is working its wonders. So I'm going to hit spacebar to play. Okay, let's disable tools and click and drag a little bit. So A, delete, D, control click to get my brush tool back. So instead of a 3x3 brush, let's go back to brush size and let's take a line. Let's go 8x1. So this is 8 pixels wide, 1 pixel high. So it's 8 pixels wide and 1 pixel by 1 pixel, right? So if I click now, we'll get what should be discrete notes that are sustaining a bit. Okay. These tools over here, I'm not going to worry about it so much, except to say we can, let's see if we blur it out. Right, the same pixel information is smeared, but there's all kinds of stuff you can do. So control click, brush, click, echo, and pre-echo. And actually this grid, this is actually another grid setting that will affect how these effects are rendered. So this allows me to quantize it a bit. So let's say to 16, and I say echo, right? So this is going to echo every 16 pixels. Pre-echo is going to go prior, right? There's all sorts of stuff we can do. So if I click, 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 and then echo, and I hit spacebar, right? If I A to select it all, you can click and drag this around. If I select A and hit X to cut, and then let's grab this marquee tool, and I make a small selection and I paste. It's going to take my selection and it's going to resize it to the marquee, the new marquee that I had drawn. So let's step backwards. I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to hit A for the whole canvas. I'm going to get V for paste. There's our sequence, right? That's the original sequence that I copied. So I'm going to X to cut. I'm going to now select just vertical sort of section and V for paste. I've got the same information, but it's sort of being transformed so that the same information is either compressed or stretched out from its original size to the new size, depending on the marquee and the selection in each. So I'm going to hit A, delete, D for deselect. Let's try something different. Control click for brush. I'm going to do, let's say, 1, 2, 3. This time I'm going to use the marquee tool. So control click, marquee. I'm going to select just that small section, X to cut, A for all, V for paste. Right? So I think that answers, I think that's going to help answer your second question about how things seemed to resize. So if you take the same steps that you had earlier, see if that starts to make sense. So I'm going to hit delete, D, control click, brush tool. So we were going to do something that was note friendly, okay, using this tool grid. So if you're composing or you're building a canvas of notes, this tool grid can help give you structure. It's sort of the rules for how note information might appear in your sequence. Right? If this were a traditional DAW of some kind, you might have quantize settings. You might have the actually quantizing to particular notes, and the mapping here it does contribute to controlling that information. But so does the grid setting on the y-axis. Right? So if the grid is constrained to 1, which is no constraint, and I click and I drag up, I'm going to just drag it towards the top, every pixel the canvas is allowing note information to be added. So I'm going to hit Z. Let's increase this to 2, and now I'm going to try the same thing. Click, drag up, right? And so now it is quantizing, the tool grid is quantizing the note information that dragging my tool will apply to the canvas, right, at that interval. So at a 2 pixel, quantized to every other pixel. If we take this to 5, right, so drag up, right. So this is just a way to help you control the harmonics, control note information, right. Now I was just dragging straight up. Actually here I did drag it to the left or the right because A, delete, D, deselect, control click. So that's the y-axis, but the x-axis with our new brush, which is, let's try that again, 8 by 1, let's say. If I click and drag to the right, okay, our brush is 8 pixels wide. The grid, the tool grid that's being applied, because this is enabled, right now it's not being applied, Z to undo. With grid enabled, the tool grid is only going to draw on intervals of 12 pixels. So if I click and drag, right, it's going to break that up. So that also gives you control. I'm going to A, delete, D, control click. The tool grid X setting, that value, contributes to the rhythmic information. That's the tool grid. Now, one more time, control click, draw, right? What we're seeing are notes for a brush that is 8 pixels wide and 1 pixel in height, that on the x-axis is only being quantized to every 29 pixels, and vertically is quantized to an octave. Bring this to 11 and bring this, sure, do that. I'm getting stymied by the marquee, right? So that's 11 pixels on the x-axis, and then it should be 12 pixels on the vertical, and right, because we're in the major scale, so they're not semitones. If we go to semitones, actually, and then I redraw this grid, so draw the default grid, right? We see now that the note information is conforming to 12 pixels, right? So A, delete, D for deselect, control click. So that's that. There's so much that you might choose to do with it, but I encourage you to really go in and spend time exploring at least one of the rooms. Each of these tabs is a room. And maybe not the montage room, because that's how you make use of elements and assets that you can sort of prepare in these other rooms. So pick one of these 4 or 5 rooms here, the first 5. See what it is that you're taken by, that you'd like to explore. If the waveform editor is always visible at the top, and it will be affected in different ways depending on the room. But Image Synth is a great one to start with. I think there are a lot of lessons that you would learn that then can be applied elsewhere. But hope that helps. And yeah, there's so much here. There is so much here. But have fun. I think it's great. I think it's great, and it's been a couple of decades now. But again, thank you for your question, because I am encouraged and inspired to take this back out, refamiliarize myself, and put it to use. It's a really unique tool, set of tools, really. I always in talking with friends about this over the years, I'd say this is like Photoshop, where there are 100 different tools and you may only use 15 of them, and those 15 might differ between each person. So I think the goal is not to know all of what it offers. I think the goal is to find how you work with it, how it inspires and affects and impacts positively whatever you're doing with audio, and then run with it. And as you continue to grow familiar with what you're learning, then start to dip into other rooms, sort of expand your understanding of all this other functionality. There is